Hey everybody, Johnny5 Alive here, and welcome to a video series where I showcase what I found to be the best in slot min-max build for one of the 12 Midnight Suns heroes. I will also give a quick review of all the hero abilities to show what other potential fun build options the hero may have, or reveal the thought process that ultimately led me to the one and only best choice to min-max said hero. Once we have given an overview of the hero, I will give a tier list rating in direct comparison to the other 12 heroes. We'll also mention what battle items and heroes synergize best with this build. This is a 1 of 12 part series. If you end up finding this video informative or helpful in any ways, please check the video description for a full playlist of my series for Midnight Suns, and also don't forget to like and subscribe. So let's get into today's hero. Today's hero is the almighty heroic leader, Captain America. Captain's design and overall kit is a very diverse and unique in the sense that he can function as both a support to aid your team, but he is also hands down the most defensive tank in the game. He is nearly invincible when it comes to survivability, but we can't overlook Captain's damage either. He hits really hard, and with the right set of battle items and team composition, his attacks become devastating, making him an all-around amazing hero in every possible aspect: support, tanking, and damage. Wow, what a champion. Speaking on his tier list ranking, without mods, Captain is just a solid tank and support. His default kit is very powerful. Having a hero who is effectively unkillable in the early and mid game puts him right in the A tier for me. I put Blade above him simply because Blade provides the invaluable ability to mark enemies, granting card refunds, something that Captain doesn't have without mods. With mods, Captain becomes even better, of course, but in the late game, it's all about killing enemies as fast as possible, and you don't really need a tank at all. So many of the other heroes definitely graduate above Captain, and Captain stays in the middle of the pack in the A tier where he was without mods. So let's take a closer look at my build and recommendations for the almighty Captain America. We're going to kick things off by looking at my hero profile. Captain's only been on 25 missions with the Hunter, but he's KO'd nearly 300 enemies in that time. If you want to compare that to, say, my Scarlet Witch, for example, who's been on 100 missions, she's KO'd almost the same amount of enemies as Captain. So that's pretty crazy. Captain definitely shines in terms of doing damage, as I mentioned. And you could just take a look at all my other cards here. My most played card is the Brooklyn Handshake. I love getting use out of the Shield Bounce and Quick Punch, but overall, his whole kit is amazing, and I really do love a lot of his abilities, and we're going to take a look at some really cool possible options for Captain here today. First things first, let's take a look at his hero passive. Begin combat with 69 block. Nice. Gain 27 block each turn. This is not scaling very well with the game's difficulty and the champion levels. It's really mediocre. 69 block at the start of a mission is literally nothing, and 27 block each turn is also nothing. This is super abysmal. If they increase this by 10 times, where you gain 700 block at the beginning of a mission and 270 block each turn, it would still be okay, because enemies are hitting you for between 500 to sometimes even 800 on Ultimate 3 level 40 difficulties. Again, this is why you want to kill enemies before they even have a chance to hit you, which is definitely possible in most cases. So he doesn't even really need to tank that much. But in the early game, while you're leveling up, when you first get him in the mid game, he's a really good tank, and these numbers are much smaller, but the passive still really sucks in the early and mid game. This definitely needs to see a buff. It's probably one of the weakest passives in the game. So before looking at my build, let's talk about his stats. He's champion level 26 for me with a friendship level of 20. The more champion levels you pump into him, the more health he's going to get and the more offense. One nice thing about Captain is some of his abilities are based off of his shield damage. Your shields can never go above above the value of your health. So in other words, I have 850 health on Captain. That means I can get his shields up to 850. So obviously the more champion levels you pump into Captain, the more shields he can have, making him even more and more of a better tank. But again, you don't really need to tank in the late game if you're just killing everything. So I definitely think it will be welcome if they give us more difficulties where tanking and surviving is more required. Then Captain will be a much better and more valued hero. But if you're also making use of his abilities that do damage based off of his shields, obviously the more health you have, the more shields you have, the more damage he can possibly put out, which is definitely a unique aspect that no other hero has, making Captain very unique. Talking about his stats, you're definitely going to want to level up his crit chance and his crit damage. Crit chance caps at 50%, crit damage at 75%. I prioritize some of the other heroes that I enjoyed a little bit more, some of the heavier hitting damage dealers and that sort of thing. So I'm still working on getting my crit chance and crit damage up for him. Fortitude is obviously, he's the one character in the game that's going to make the most use out of Fortitude. This is the first character I cranked up to max Fortitude at 50% was in fact Captain America. Increases the percentage of maximum health granted as block at the start of each mission. So he's going to start the mission with basically 425 shield. He's already halfway there to building his shields up to max. That's really huge. So he's going to benefit from Fortitude the most out of any other character. I also highly recommend increasing his power to the max, which is 25%. This is going to increase the size of his area abilities like his shield bounce. Resilience is also really effective because he is a tank, increases the chance to resist negative status effects. So if there are enemies left over and they are hitting Captain, if they're applying any vulnerabilities to him or whatnot, he has a 60% chance to resist it. This is also great for battle items such as the one that grants you double damage but gives you vulnerability. He has a chance to resist the vulnerability from that item and he'll only get the plus effect and not the negative effect. Strength is also super important on Captain because he has a lot of knockbacks with his Brooklyn handshake and that sort of thing. So pretty needy character overall. He definitely does need a lot of stats. Willpower is also going to be great because if he does burn his shield down and he starts taking damage, he can start recovering some of his health passively every turn. But pretty much every stat that you could possibly get, Captain's going to see some use out of, and he's definitely a good character investing in. And if you love him, then definitely focus on his crit chance and his crit damage because he does hit hard, and we're going to show that in my build here today, and you can see that from some of the footage that I'm showing. All right, let's go take a look at my current build. I do want to quickly go into my deck and show you things that I've played around with. I've played with Spang with Quick, Brooklyn Handshake with Quick, running multiples of them. I've played with multiple best defenses, running counter on them. I've played Shield Bounce with increased area of effect to make it even bigger. I've played with Shield Bounce with Mark, allowing Captain to be a Mark support. The downside to this, it's only one Mark and it will decay at the end of the turn. So if you're not actually finishing off those enemies, you're not going to see many card play refunds off them if you're not taking advantage of it. Ultimately, I found that vulnerability was slightly better. I've also played around with his shield bashes with on KO draw a card. I think you can also mod this to be quick, but we'll talk more about his other abilities later on when we review his cards that I'm not currently using. Just wanted to show you guys the things I've played around with him and what ultimately led to what I believe to be the best build here. So kicking things off with the Brooklyn Handshake, knockback if the target was damaged this turn, forceful on KO, draw 2 cards, modified to be quick. So it already does 140 damage. The knockback's going to do even more damage, and if they were already damaged by like a shield bounce or something like that, you're going to have a forceful knockback, sending them even further back. So it's going to do a hefty amount of damage. If we get him strengthened, if we get him overpowered, if we draw this as a crit, this is going to do up to 500 damage. As you can see from some of my footage, Brooklyn Handshake is getting out of control, and because it's quick, you could kill a unit with this or knock them into a minion that's going to kill them, triggering the quick effect, allowing you to play it for free, and you're drawing 2 cards out of the deal. So this is a huge card, super valuable. I definitely recommend running 2 of them in your deck if you really like them, but we're going to talk about why I only run 1, and that is because of Quick Punch. So Quick Punch, it's a taunt, it's a quick, it draws a card, and then I've modified it to be on KO, gained 1 strengthened. I really find that Captain lacks just a little bit of damage, and being able to kill a minion to buff his strength to increase his damage by 50% is going to make all the other abilities in his kit do 50% more damage. So rather rather than running 2 Brooklyn handshakes, I like to sacrifice one for a quick punch, and we use this to take out some minions to build up his strength to therefore make him really powerful. So I like running 1 quick punch in the deck for that strengthened. Now, before we talk about dig in, I want to talk about the best defense. The best defense, Captain gains block equal to the damage he does for 2 turns, draw 2 Captain cards, and I've modified this to gain 1 counter. This is a skill card that you can't mod to be free because it draws cards. You can increase it to be increased heroism if you want, but I really find that the counter is good for his playing on his tanking. If there are any enemies remaining and they do hit him, he's going to fight back and do damage. Ultimately though, I feel like there's an argument to be said that he doesn't need any counter at all, because in most of the missions that I'm doing and some of the footage you'll see in the background, he really doesn't have an opportunity to fight back because everything is generally dead. With that said, I do probably recommend taking +2 heroism on this, giving it a +4 heroism, generating a lot more heroism for your team. That's definitely a good option to go, but seeing as he is a tank, I wanted to play with that fantasy a little bit and have his kit sort of revolve around that, and sometimes I will just kind of like round them up, tank them up, taunt them up, and then let them have a turn so I could riff some damage on them with his counters. The important part about this card is the fact that whatever damage he's going to be doing, he's going to be gaining equivalent of that in block, ramping up his block really quickly. Now, the downside to this card is the fact that it costs a card play. You're playing a cost of a card play, you're gaining that counter, you're gaining those cards, you're gaining that heroism, and now he's able to generate block, which will effectively pump his shield charge, which we'll look at later. Now, if you happen to draw this again on this turn or the next turn, it's going to be really costly to use another card play on this, especially while the effect is lasting for up to 2 turns. But I did find on the second turn, if you want to do the counter play, the 1 counter that you gain from this mod will have decayed by then, and that is why Dig In is a really good card. Select an ally, taunt all the enemies targeting them, he gains a bunch of block, he gains a counter, and the card is free. So this is effectively a way to restack your counters for free while also drawing the attention of all the enemies. And with the battle item, the Evil Eye Totem, select a hero, apply 2 mark to all enemies targeting them. Super valuable card, quite easy to craft. You can craft them quite often and in large quantities. This is going to allow Captain to taunt everything and then apply marks to them, making him a mark support hero. Of course, you're only going to have 1 of these per mission, so you have to use it valuably, or you can bring Doctor Strange to restore it up to 2 times, and then you could play this up to 3 times, basically 1 every single turn. So I like the combination of these cards so that we can build up his shield, we can build up his counter stacks, we can taunt the enemies, and then we can go from there and go and mark them. So I find that the best defense works really well with a dig in and your deck. Now, moving on to his heroic cards, I really like Spang. Spang is amazing, especially because if the enemy is targeting Captain, it's going to do basically double damage. On KO, it draws 2 cards, and we've modified it to be quick. So it's most likely going to do a lot of damage. 400 at the base, we've modified it to be strengthened from our quick punch. Now it's doing 600 damage, and if we have overpower serum on him, we could do 1200 damage with this, meaning it will kill pretty much anything that it hits, and refund the card play and draw 2 cards. So I did at one point try running 2 Spangs in my deck. I was getting great value out of it. It does a ton of damage. Absolutely amazing. But because we are using that battle item to taunt enemies, we can't rely on just 1 dig in, and that's where I go to my shield bounce for. Damage and taunt every enemy in an area. You apply weak, and I've modified this to also apply vulnerable. So we're weakening them, we're making them vulnerable, so they're super squishy, and with the stats that we looked at earlier with the plus 25% power, we're increasing the radius of this to be even larger, and then we're taunting all of them, making it so we could throw one of these out, we could toss out our dig in, and everybody on the battlefield has their attention on Captain. He could use the battle item to put mark on all of them, and then he could go to town with his Spang because everybody's focused on him. He can kill those focused enemies. We could kill them with our Brooklyn handshake. Anything that's really low, we can kill with quick punch, and now he's finishing off enemies. He's drawing cards, and he's doing it all for free. Absolutely amazing. I really love shield bounce too. It's just a fun skill to use. But bing, 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 bing. It's bouncing off everything, doing tons of damage, weakening them, vulnerable. It's amazing. So I definitely like running 2 of these personally, but 2 Spangs is also a great option. Last but not least, we have his legendary ability, Shield Charge. It's going to consume all of his block to deal damage to every enemy in a line, and for each enemy hit, it's going to draw a card. And I've modified this to have an increased width, and it makes it really fat, so you can hit a lot more enemies in that line. Now, the one reason you want to run the best defense in your deck is specifically just for that legendary card, because now that we have best defense activated, any damage that he's going to do is going to be converted into block. So while this consumes all of your block, you're going to do thousands of damage to everybody in a line, and you're going to regain that right away as block. So you won't use actually any block at all. So I usually don't ever use my shield charge until I've used best defense, thrown out a couple abilities to maximize how much shield he has, to maximize the amount of damage that shield charge does, and then I'm going to regain all of that back. So looking at everything I have here, there are different playstyles you can go for. You can take out the shield charge entirely, put in a second Spang, so now you have 2 shield bounces, 2 Spangs. Then you actually don't need the best defense because you're not needing to build up your shields anymore, because you don't need to unleash your shields on shield charge. And if you're killing everything, you don't really need to worry about taking damage with him, so you actually don't really need the best defense in your deck, but you still want to taunt everybody to get their attention so that you can use the battle item to mark them, so dig in still has value. But I can make an argument that what we could do, taking a look at a different build for him, we do something like this. You have to have at least minimum 1 skill in your deck, so we have the free taunt all enemies to draw their attention, to gain some block, to gain a counter, and then we double down on Brooklyn Handshake. We have a quick punch to gain our strengthened, we have double Spangs for drawing cards and doing massive damage with card refunds, and our shield bounces. So this is definitely another great option to build on your Captain America. But if you want to make use out of that legendary ability, if you want to play around his ability to counter and build up his shields, the other build that I just showed is going to get you there. So let's head over to the Forge and take a look at the other abilities that we have not yet talked about, or the ones that we looked at briefly, and talk about them in further detail. First things first is his punch. We can look at the upgraded version. It just does more damage. Not a very good card, even though it does 140 damage. You have to modify this to be quick, and it's not drawing any cards. So considering so many of his other things like quick punch upgraded does draw a card, same with Brooklyn Handshake, he just has better options. So I would never use this card, probably one of the worst cards in his kit. Here we have Tactician upgraded. He gains, it gives allies block, and by default it gains 250 block and draws 2 cards, plus 2 heroism. So you can't modify this to be free. You can modify it to gain heroism, but it's a pretty expensive card, and the amount of block that it's generating for him and his allies is abysmal. So you're just going to be using it to draw 2 cards, when really you could just get that same effect out of an upgraded best defense. And now all of your abilities are generating even more block than Tactician would. So best defense is just a better Tactician. So I have, again, no reason that you would ever run this in your deck. Shield Bash is a really interesting card because it consumes 33% of your block to deal additional damage. I have played around with this. The downside to this is you have to have built up your block. And because it's only a third of his overall health, or I guess his overall shields, in the case that he's at a roughly 900, right? He's at 900 health. If we were to build up his block all the way up to 900, a third of that is 300 damage. So this would do 370 damage. But it doesn't scale with strength because, well, the 69 damage scales with strength, so it would go up to like 120, but the actual damage based off the block doesn't scale with strength. It scales with your block. So in theory, Brooklyn Handshake, once you've buffed up his strength and you've knocked him back into something and you're drawing cards with it, is just a better card, especially because if you draw this early on and he doesn't have any shields built up, or you haven't played best defense yet, Shield Bash is going to do next to nothing, and it's not drawing cards, and unless you mod it with quick, it's going to cost you a card play. So I really wanted this to work. I think what would make this card a lot better is if it was consume 100% of your block to do 100% of the damage. Then this thing could go like bananas crazy, or at the very minimum 50%. I think 50% of your overall shields, because if you built your shields up to 900, then this would do 450 plus the base damage. So now it's actually coming close to what a Brooklyn Handshake can do. But I think for this to really get any value, it would need to be 66% to 100%. And I don't think the developer's going to buff that anytime soon. So I just don't see much value in Shield Bash, and it's really hard to get going. And that's all of his cards. So talking about the battle items once again, I mentioned this earlier, but the apply to mark to all enemies targeting Captain America is going to be your best friend, the Evil Eye Totem. And yeah, even just having one of these in your deck, allowing you to mark basically everyone on the map. Even if the mission lasts multiple turns, you're going to get so much value out of your first turn having one of these in your deck. And then again, if you bring Doctor Strange, you'll have up to 3 of these, making them even better. If you are running Doctor Strange, I highly recommend a major strength tonic. Select the hero, they gain 1 overpowered and 2 vulnerability. As mentioned, overpowered doubles your strength and is multiplies with strength. So this will give you 100% more strength, and because we have strength on our quick attack, that's another 50%, bringing you to 150% more damage with all Captain's abilities. And if you have a 60% chance to resist negative effects, you might not even get the 2 vulnerable. Chances are when you use this, you're going to kill everything on the battlefield because everything is now marked. There, you have nothing to worry about in terms of killing enemies and getting card play refunds. So everything will die. You don't have to worry that he's vulnerable going into the enemy's turn. They're most likely dead. And even if he is vulnerable, he has so much shields, he can take a hit or 2. And a utility belt is always a nice card to run on Captain, just to get things going. Like if you didn't get his quick attack in your hand right out of the get-go and you want to build up his strengthened, or you're trying to fish for that best defense, you can throw a utility belt on him to draw 2 of his cards, and from there a lot of his cards also draw his own cards, and that will just get the momentum building up his hand. And last but not least, I like to talk about heroes that he pairs well with. As mentioned, Doctor Strange is going to be his best friend if you're utilizing those battle items to mark all enemies with battle items. Then Doctor Strange is obviously your #1 pick for Captain America. Absolutely, he is the best combo that you can bring with Captain. But if you're going to not use those battle items to mark enemies, it's good to run Captain with a mark support, such as a Scarlet Witch, an Iron Man, or even a Blade. Blade is the weakest of those 3 options because Blade also has to play Make Him Bleed to start building up his bleed stacks, or Captain also has to play the best defense. So they both have a card that they have to play that costs a card play to get going. Now if you have 2 characters having to play Make Him Bleed and the best defense, it's only going to leave you with 1 card remaining. But assuming that Blade can make something happen and start marking enemies with that, then you could start getting those card play refunds going. But it's not likely the case because Blade actually has to use another card to get everything bleeding. So then you're going to be out of card plays from there. But in the case that this is the combo that you want to go with Blade and a Captain, you will start utilizing Captain's defense and his counters a little bit more because your first turn is going to be a little bit rough going with Blade. So I still highly recommend you go with Wanda with Captain or Doctor Strange. So those are my recommendations. You can also play Captain as an AoE mark support, you putting the marks on his abilities, his AoE abilities, and then you can make an argument that he'll pair well with pretty much anyone. So that's also an option you can go with. But my personal favorite pick is to buff the heck out of his strength and go with Doctor Strange to restore all those battle items, turning Captain into an absolute killing machine. So that's my favorite way of playing Captain. That is my Captain build. What did you guys think? Fire away down in the comments below. Is there a way you play Captain slightly differently? Love to hear your thoughts and comments. And that's going to do it for me in today's video. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye now.